NYPD and has won over 10 billion in lawsuit damages that have resulted in policy and safety opportunities for millions in underprivileged neighborhoods and communities. She's also the author of Power Concedes Nothing. Connie Rice, thank you for joining us this evening. It is truly a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Commissioner Hallman.
In a city like West Hollywood, where the demographics are not reflective of the broader region, but where all are welcomed, how would you suggest we navigate today's social changes of equality for all?
Well, Commissioner, I think we're in a really tumultuous and volatile period in our long struggle to make the Constitution apply to everybody. We've been in this struggle for 400 years. Native Americans have been in it for longer. So I think at this point in history, every single community is at a very special point in deciding, do we go forward with multiracial democracy? Or are we going to roll all of the gains back? Are we going to go backward or are we going to go forward? And I think that any community, West Hollywood or East LA or South, I talk about South Bureau, I think in terms of police bureaus, because I do so much work on policing. But every single enclave of this region, I mean, there's 16 million people in this region. And for West Hollywood to understand not just the communities that are adjacent, but the incredible diaspora, the incredible richness of our global community here in this county, and not be afraid of it, but understand all of the different dynamics and understand that we're in a swimming pool. We can't raise walls against one another. We need to really become fluent in what the needs are for every single community to have a fair chance and a fair shot at getting on a ladder with real rungs that can get them to some level of safety, of prosperity, and of being able to take part in the American dream. Right now, it's an illusion. I understand that, but I think what you're engaged in as a commissioner and what I engage in as a lawyer and an activist and a policy wonk with a flamethrower, I would say, is about realizing and making accessible the tools that make equality attainable or at least reachable, if not equality, then at least opportunity. I don't know if that made any sense, but I think the main point is that for West Hollywood, everybody needs their radar up, ears open, because we're in a titanic struggle right now just to save the Madisonian framework for democracy. We have a promissory note for democracy. But Commissioner, we don't have democracy. We basically have an oligarchy with elections. And to me, safety is the first of all civil rights, because without safety, you have nothing. All the other rights don't matter. Dead people don't vote. Traumatized people don't speak. So safety is the ring bolt of our freedoms. And I think that a lot of the struggles that your communities in West Hollywood are going through are the very same struggles for recognition, for acceptance, for the ability to be who you are without suffering physically or psychologically or in terms of opportunity.
Which leads me to my next question. West Hollywood is a city that has a large LGBTQI plus community, which is supported by the city and its policies. However, I feel like we're almost in a bubble as we see so many cities and states instituting laws and bans against transgender rights and other minority groups, such as voter suppression. It's like we're regressing to a less developed state, wouldn't you say? What are your feelings on where this experiment is going and how well it's working for us?
I absolutely agree with what you're saying. If you have a sense that things are going backward at the same time they're pushing forward, you're right. At the same time, the country has begun to understand the vital need to accept the orientation communities. It is one of the fault lines that's the biggest. The fear, the the industry, the hounds of fear and hate have been unleashed in this country, and it's part of an effort for sort of a white nationalist evangelical movement to retain power and dominance. And they've lost on every front. So now they're trying to entrench minority rule, and they're trying to roll back all of the measures and the laws and the strategies and even the cultural expressions that have opened up to let the voices a lot of us have never heard. I think that the aggressive and vicious pushback is going to continue. And I say to this set of communities the same thing that I said to the Jewish communities when the anti-Semitism started spiking off the charts, the Islamophobia started going off the charts, the anti-Black racism has risen, 30% over the last 2 years. But the violence and the vitriol and the rollback of the protections for the LGBTQI plus community is astounding. It is aggressive, it's vicious, it's not going to stop. And you've got to be able to have a litigation front, a legislative front, an electoral front, a cultural front to keep pushing. The fear of this set of communities, the fear, especially of trans communities. When I go out into the Antelope Valley or I'm in the white communities that are thinking we're being erased, when they were marching, Jews will not replace us in Charlottesville. Well, that's a very strong feeling of we as what, when I say we, from their perspective, I'm trying to understand the fear because you can't roll it back if you don't understand it. It's gotten to a level of hysteria that they actually think that they're in an existential movement to save themselves from being erased, and that the primacy of white national Christianity is being rolled back. Well, they're not wrong. They're right. The country is more secular than it used to be, and they're feeling very endangered. They're even fighting with other Christian denominations. But the level of almost terror that their children might be exposed to someone who goes through the struggle of figuring out where they are on that spectrum, and whether they're trans or whether they're plus or whether they're intersexual. They do not understand any of this, and they're scared. They're frightened of it, and the hatred comes through. I'm astonished at the hatred, and the only way to fight it is with alliances. The only way the slaves got freed was with the Quakers and the abolitionists. The only way that you can protect targeted minorities that are so marginalized that no one has any stake in protecting these communities is to create the alliances. Is to the alliances right now. If we lose the democratic framework, or that promissory note for democracy that the Madisonian framework is, if we lose that, we can't protect any discrete and any discrete and insular minorities, which racial groups who are targeted, we are discrete and insular minorities. The LGBTQI communities are insular minorities who are easily attackable. We are killed with impunity. And we have to understand that to fight this, we are not an electoral majority right now because we've entrenched minority rule. That's what the voter suppression is about. That's what the takeover of the gerrymandering is about. That's what packing the courts with judges who are hostile to the Voting Rights. So the Voting Rights Act is done. It's over. I can't even file the cases I used to file 30 years ago and win. My mentor is Lonnie Guinier, the greatest civil rights, voting rights lawyer in the country. And I can no longer file those cases. So we've got to restore the legislation. We have to expand the legislation to make sure that it covers West Hollywood communities.
But what do you think then is the solution to deal with voter suppression? You're saying you can no longer file certain cases? I mean, is there a workaround? What can we do?
The only solution at this point, and we have about a month and a half to get it done, is there has to be federal legislation that counters the it's close to 400 sets of laws to entrench local minority rule. Even some of these laws will even allow a court to overturn an election without proof of fraud. I mean, what they're trying to do is they are trying to codify what Donald Trump tried to do with the big lie about the presidential election. He couldn't steal it. He couldn't bully local Republican officials into finding votes to make him win. So now they're going to make it possible the next time with these new laws to actually not only suppress the vote, but to nullify the election. What they are saying is that anybody who wins who isn't our candidate, we no longer recognize the legitimacy of. They started with Clinton. They never recognized the legitimacy of the Clinton administration. I'll never forget going to Tennessee and finding evangelical preachers talking about Bill Clinton murdered some White House aide. I mean, it was, and they certainly never accepted Obama. They will not accept any Democratic elected a leader because they are not their candidate. That's not democracy. That's fascism. We've been blooded for fascism. So when you're in this kind of crosshairs, and we've been here before, we're where we were in the 1850s, working up to the Civil War, only it's worse now because of the technology that amplifies the misinformation and entrenches it, makes it even harder to counter. Because at least with the Civil War, they were fighting over a common set of facts. Can't even do that now. So I think that for this set of, the most important thing is to get a piece of legislation that you can get passed federally. Forget about the bells and whistles of HR 1 and HR 4. You've got to get the basics in there so that they can't nullify elections. You get rid of the worst aspects of these voter suppression laws, and you eliminate the election nullification provisions of these laws. So access to early voting, access, wiping out all of the restrictions on mail voting, voting by mail, making sure that you can't shut down polling precincts. Like for example, they make people wait 6 hours in line. Well, the only communities they make people wait in 6 hours in line to vote are in poor Black communities and poor Latino communities and Democratic strongholds. This is an assault on democracy, and the only thing that can stop it is federal legislation. They've got to get off the utopia bill. You can't get 50 Democrats to vote for it. Get something carved out that gets rid of the worst abuses, and it stops the voter and election nullification provisions, and get it passed. Get it passed now.
Well, with that said, do you think we should get rid of the filibuster? I mean, is this part of the problems? You know, our government just does not seem to be working.
Yes, the filibuster, like the Electoral College, is part of the slavery preservation machinery in the Constitution. Of course, the filibuster should have been gotten rid of a long time ago. But with the opposition, you've got some Democrats who are delusional about bipartisanship. Given that reality, what you need to do is carve out one of the exceptions. Harry Reid carved out an exception for district court judges. Mitch McConnell carved out an exception to the filibuster for all judicial appointments, especially Supreme Court appointments. And so there needs to be two things. Return to the old filibuster so that they don't just have to click a box on email to say I'm filibustering, but they actually have to stand in the well of the Senate and stand on their feet for hours and hours and hours, the way it was supposed to be. If you want to stop the majority from having its will, you ought to have to put some skin in the game. But the most important thing is to carve out the exceptions for constitutional measures. The Democrats don't understand. There is no long game here. They will probably lose the midterms, which will pave the way for all of this stuff to get so entrenched we can't reverse it. We, as civil rights lawyers, cannot litigate our way out of these laws. Mark my words, there is no litigation that can roll this back. It has to be federal legislation. And if the filibuster is in the way, you've got to get a deal to carve out an exception and make it an actual real filibuster, because right now the Democrats don't have the votes to end it. But does it need to be ended? Yes.
Do you think, there's been a call for big tech, and as you mentioned earlier, we live in a very different climate where we're one click away from a right or wrong. It depends on what you're following, what your news source is. And today broke the story that Facebook may have been manipulating, I'll say, certain situations in the direction of the previous administration. Do you think, as Elizabeth Warren has said, that some of these entities need to be broken up?
Not just broken up, but they need to be recognized as that they are actual publishers, and they need to be subject to the same rules that newspapers are subject to. The danger of this technology, we've created something we don't understand in the internet. It's worse than the Wild Wild West. The thing that made my heart sink was when I realized from the research that disinformation and actual fraud and lies travel 6 times faster through this technology than the truth. So the facts can never catch up, truth can never catch up. That's a dagger pointed at the heart and the brain of democracy. And we don't have the answer. So break up, what's fascinating to me is when I didn't understand, because I'm a digital idiot. I actually write longhand. I don't do social media. It requires you to be social, and I don't understand it. I don't tweet, chirp. I don't do any of it. Because I have no desire to engage in technology I don't understand. But given that the world has gone that way, and dinosaurs like me will soon be irrelevant, um, my view of it is that I think what we didn't understand was that the physics of using us, consumers, we're not the consumers in the technology, we're the product. And once I understood that our eyeballs, the business model is a business model meant to amplify outrage, because outrage draws eyeballs, and eyeballs are the currency. So we're the product. We are not the consumers. The ad people and the folks who fund the money stream, that business is based on the generation of outrage and lies. So that's what I want regulated, is I want the disinformation harnessed. I told Mayor Bloomberg when I was talking to him about his presidential run, I said, Mayor, you don't need to run for president. You want to help this democracy, buy Fox News and put it out of business. That's what will help. Yes, they would rig up another network, but at least it would slow down a likelihood that we're going to see another January 6th violent seditionist insurrection. You realize that these are the last battles of the American Civil War, and they're not fighting to preserve slavery. They're fighting to preserve the monuments to slavery, and they're fighting to preserve the dominance of white dominion over our political and economic systems. And that does not mean white people. It means, because the 20 million white people who got out of their pandemic homes to march against the murder of George Floyd, they've decided they want to go forward with multiracial democracy. I'm talking about whiteness. I'm talking about the dominion of entrenched white nationalism. And it's about a third of the country that's leaning that way, and about 40 to 45% of white America. So I keep telling my white friends, don't ask how you can help minorities. I said a national reckoning on race, a national reckoning on justice, a national reckoning on whether democracy goes forward doesn't include us. We're the targets of that national discussion. A national reckoning on race and justice is a conversation amongst white Americans about how much injustice and racism they want to tolerate now. And until white America, good white America, understands that and joins this as a battle as opposed to an exercise, we stand really on the precipice of getting ready to lose the democracy.
Which is a scary thought.
It should be scary.
West Hollywood has a history of partnering with non-sworn personnel, like our block by block security ambassadors and social and mental health services. How do cities and advisory groups like West Hollywood balance the need for public safety and police protection with the recent push to rethink policing as it relates to criminal justice reform?
That's a complex one. Let me try to unpack it. Great question. The the first thing to understand is the difference between enforcement and safety. Enforcement is not safety. Safety is much bigger. Enforcement comes under safety because you have to do strategic enforcement to stabilize and reduce violence enough for you to be able to actually apply the holistic wraparound partnerships between the groups you described, law enforcement, elected officials. It takes a whole of community, whole of neighborhood wraparound safety strategy that isn't based in shock and awe, search and destroy enforcement from police. What you want is you want police who have the guardian mentality, not the warrior mentality. And you have to have police who understand that mass incarceration and locking up people because of addiction, targeting the homeless, targeting trans people, targeting other, for putting them in jail, criminalizing homelessness, addiction, orientation, folks who are lost and can't get a foothold. That's just, it's not only cruel, it's stupid and it's wasteful. So you've got to move law enforcement away from that realm of shock and awe enforcement, enforcing stupid policies like the national wars on drugs that can't be won, national wars on gangs that can't be won. You cannot handcuff your way out of an ideology of alienation. You cannot handcuff your way or imprison your way out of addiction. And you cannot lock up and end, you can't end despair with handcuffs. So what you're talking about is a whole of community strategy to provide security amidst despair. And that phrase comes from the military wing of the Pentagon that actually does population safety studies, trying to keep populations safe while you're dropping bombs. Can you believe that? That's, the military actually has a wing that studies that. And I went to the Pentagon to see what they call security amidst despair, and went to epidemiologists and trauma specialists, and we pieced together a strategy called partnership policing. And it's a whole of neighborhood strategy that we do in the housing projects in the city of Los Angeles. And it sounds a lot like what you described West Hollywood is doing, which is partnering with NGOs, partnering with multiple government agencies, not just the cops, because police can't do this alone. We set police and poor communities up to fail when we say we're going to make a ghetto, we're going to take all of the opportunity out, we're going to make sure there are no social services, we're going to make sure there's misery and despair, and then we're going to make sure that the thin blue line contains and suppresses that misery and doesn't reach Nancy Reagan or Connie Rice's neighborhood, where the gated communities are. So until we get rid of that mission for law enforcement, which is containment, suppression, enforcing a racial order that is based on segregation, enforcing a cultural order that is xenophobic across a lot of fronts, and enforcing an economic order that is so grotesquely unfair that even the oligarchs are saying there's too much inequality. So you've got to take cops out of the business of enforcing an unjust paradigm of order and put them in the business of partnership with communities to solve those communities' problems, to lower the despair, lower the trauma, lower the violence, and holistically heal so that you create safety. Now, that's not a whole bunch of social work talk. We actually had this partnership policing community strategy evaluated by UCLA. And this isn't done in areas where it's easy to do. This is done in Jordan Downs housing project, where the Great Street Crips run that housing project. This is done in the most dangerous and violent hot pockets of the barrio and the ghettos of LA. because the whole ghetto is not a huge crime zone. There are pockets where the gangs control everything and where the wars over drugs are fought. And that's where the kids dodge bullets to get to school. That's where the grandmothers still have to put their infants to sleep in bathtubs, their grandchildren to sleep in bathtubs. We live in a first world city that is surrounded by third world pockets. And I go into the third world pockets to try to solve the problems that have gotten to a point where they're epidemic. They're at an epidemic level. You have epidemic gang homicides, you have an epidemic of gang homicide, youth gang homicide, and trauma. And it's all been evaluated and documented. And if you're a teacher in Watts and you've been there for more than 5 years, you are suffering post-traumatic stress levels at Civil War levels. If you're a child in those housing projects, 90% of those children have seen a top felony, a murder, a dead body, a rape. They're exposed to violence all of the time. And if you don't get rid of the violence and the trauma, you can't stop the violent crime. So you're right. A holistic wraparound strategy is smart. West Hollywood is doing it. We're trying to do it with cadres of police. But guess what? The police don't want to change. Sitting in your car and stopping people randomly is easy. It's lazy. It's easy. You get to rack up stats. Doesn't matter what the stop is good or not. You get to look good at ComStat. That kind of lazy policing needs to stop. Police need to stop thinking about their career ladders and start thinking about putting the safety of the poorest communities in this region first. Make
Oh,
sense?
yes, it leads me to my next question. The cries to defund the police have become louder than ever, especially since the murder of George Floyd. When you were battling misconduct cases, did you ever think we would get to such a pivotal point in history where people of all walks of life, color, and ages would demand police reform?
No, I didn't. And they get the Black Lives Matter movement is an astounding thing to behold. To take a hashtag into an international movement that demands that Black lives count and matter is an incredible thing. They have made police reform and the demand to make Black lives matter, because Black lives have never mattered in this country. They have made it an indispensable issue at the national level, and they get nothing but a standing ovation from me. I do not say defund the police, I say refund the community, because poor communities have been ransacked, pillaged, and left to perish at the bottom of the well. And I was talking to some activists and I said, defund the police lets them off too easy. Not the police. I'm talking about society's engineering of these poor communities, abandoning them, taking the rungs out of the upward mobility. We have actually engineered downward mobility for the poor in this country. And it's the crack economy, it's the methamphetamine economy. If you go out to Antelope Valley in rural white America, we have rototilled, wood chipped the poor in this country. And I say refund the community. Now, what am I talking about? I'm not talking about the police budgets are pocket change. I'm talking about the massive investment, the Marshall Plan for inner cities and for poor white rural America that the Kerner Commission told us to do 55 years ago. That is not, you could take an NYPD $6 billion budget, LAPD $3 billion budget, put it all in a pot, take all the other 18,000 forces and put their money in a pot, and it would be a down payment for what's needed in LA. The money is in the trillions and trillions of dollars in the Defense Department that has massive weapons systems that nobody needs but Boeing and Hughes aircraft. No branch of the government needs the Osprey helicopter. No branch of the government needs the F-35. The F-35 has a $1 trillion, 55-year $1 trillion price tag, and nobody needs it. The Osprey helicopter has 2 60 Minutes episodes, and they've already spent $1 billion retooling it, and it's going to cost $500 billion. That's just 2 weapon systems we don't need. So if it's back to the guns and butter debate and documenting, just take the weapon systems the Pentagon doesn't even want, and take that money and fund the upward mobility machinery that we need for poor communities across the board. Defund the police empowers the police unions. It empowers the regressive and reactionary elements of policing. And I think that, I mean, if we were in a different country, frontally attacking the police power would be possible. In this country at this time, it's not possible. You're beginning to see the rollback. New York just elected a former cop for mayor. You're going to see the Republicans ratchet up this surging crime into a Willie Horton campaign to entrench their comeback. And so we need to be extremely strategic at this point. I have never had, I've represented the Rodney Kings of the world, I've represented the families of the George Floyds of the world, and I've represented the Serpico whistleblower change agent cops of the world. But I have never had a client from the poorest parts of America, inner city and rural, ever ask me to take away good policing. They want police who see their humanity. They want police who don't try to lock up all their sons and daughters. They want police who see them as human beings and have compassion and who are there to help bring them safety rather than mass incarceration. And we know how to do it. The question is, does the country have the political will to make it happen? And right now, that's what's missing.
Do you think that we do a disservice to law enforcement by not requiring them to have continual training, in different areas? I mean, yes, they go to the firing range and have to be recertified, but there is more to policing, especially today, than firing a weapon, I would hope.
Well, training is training important, yes. But I don't want to improve training for mass incarceration enforcement. So I think you have to go upstream a little bit. What I tell people is you can change training all you want, but you are changing training in the frame of traditional enforcement. Thin blue line, search and destroy, inner city enforcement. Until you change that thin blue line, us versus them, paramilitary, hook and book, they call it hunting, fishing, search and destroy, shock and awe. Until you change that paramilitary enforcement mission and change that paradigm of enforcement, change that gladiator mission to a guardian and safety mission, and change the conditions on the ground to make it safe enough for officers to partner with the local leaders, informal and formal, local institutions, do a full whole of neighborhood strategy together with partnership policing and community policing, and what West Hollywood is doing with its social outreach policing. Until you change that mission, you can talk about training all you want. It's not going to change a damn thing. You can talk about hiring. Hiring for what mission? You have to change the mission from shock and awe enforcement to a mission of wraparound safety and guardianship. And the mission has to, the incentive systems have to change. Right now, policing is organized to boost the career ladders of cops to get into SWAT. If you talk to LAPD officers about what's the difference between doing Westwood policing and South Bureau policing, where Watson and East LA, Hollenbeck, where East LA is, they'll tell you, oh, Miss Rice, if we go to South Bureau, we call that stick time because we get to use all our weapons and look aggressive, and SWAT will pick us first. They don't even see these communities as neighborhoods full of struggling human beings. They see them as a stage for performing for SWAT. Now, that's not evil. It's not, these are, I'm talking to reasonable, good cops who are not virulently racist. They're good people, but that mission corrupts good cops. I'm not saying there aren't bad cops. I'm saying they have a bad mission, and we give them that mission. And until this society admits, and Charlie Beck, former LAPD chief, and Charlie Beck, wrote an op-ed together that said the through line was, the theme was, until the country recognizes that it constructs ghettos and barrios, and then sends cops in to suppress and contain what those ghettos and barrios inevitably produce: the despair, the violence, the lack of opportunity, the downward mobility, and the trauma. And you send cops in there to make sure that crap that we know is going to happen in a ghetto doesn't seep out and go west of La Cienega and north of the 10. Okay? That's what our paradigm is. And until we end thin blue line, shock and awe paramilitary mission for inner city policing, nothing is going to change.
With public safety now being such a polarizing topic, with people having strong opinions on both sides of the issue, what's the compromise?
The compromise is what we're doing right now. We have to tell white America that is still so primordially terrified of black crime. That stems from the plantation systems. We're still dealing with the physics of slavery. Instead of containing and suppressing the slaves on the plantation, we now contain and suppress poor people of color in barrios and ghettos, and we do bantustans with the Native American reservations. That's how America still deals with its people of color. And until that paradigm changes, you are not going to be able to get to the DNA and the physics of this system. So I think that what we're really talking about is, it's not just reimagining, it's re-engineering. And it is, but you can't just re-engineer the cops. You have to I mean, the editorial that Charlie and I wrote said that if you don't understand that 400 years of inequality compounded over those centuries has created a labyrinth of exclusion and inequality and downward mobility, and that triggers and launches bias that seeps through every single system of opportunity that we have. All of the barriers that our communities, not just racial, but LGBTQI plus, all of our communities, our linguistic communities, our immigrant communities, our communities that with different abilities, our, all of the people who are not seen in that narrow framework of white nationalist Christianity, that framework of America as a white Christian nation that is being fought for. That's what January 6th was about. Until the rest of us band together and say, no, we're going forward to multiracial democracy that's just for everybody. Until we tell white America and convince white America, you do not need to fear that you will lose your safety if we provide safety for these populations that have never had it. In other words, you won't lose your safety if we change policing to provide safety for people who have never had it. That's the political, because this isn't a question of policing. On one level it is, I'm saying change the mission of policing, but you can even change the mission of policing, but that can't get done as long as the Willie Hortonization of our politics continues. Right now they're saying, oh my God, black crime is rising. And they will ride to victory on that because that is the third rail of American politics. So until we neutralize that, we're not going to be able to push forward nationally with the vision that West Hollywood has for its safety and policing. And the fact, you've got Lieutenant Mulder there, who comes from the Guardian mindset, and sheriffs, I think, are further behind than LAPD. But as long as you have some officers and some chiefs like Chief Beck and who are change agents, you can change the culture of policing, but we have to change our political culture. We have to change our political culture around crime. And until that happens, I'm afraid the Willie Horton tactic will always work to roll back the progress that we're making in police reform.
Do you think we're on the path to seeing strong policies and reform instituted as a result of the unfortunate killing of George Floyd? I mean, sadly, he was not the first Black man that was killed by law enforcement. He was just the first that we watched die for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. So can we move forward?
yes, we can move forward. We are moving forward. But do I think that that conviction of Chauvin is going to trigger systemic change? No. The family feels like they got a modicum of accountability. So they were happy with the verdict, not as happy with the sentence. But you've got to realize that uh, about 1,000 people a year are killed by police. Uh, African Americans are disproportionate, unarmed African Americans are disproportionately killed. And that's what the protests are about. When George Floyd was when Chauvin murdered George Floyd, the police log entry read, "Man died from medical incident during interaction with police." That was a lie. And in other words, that trial was a fluke. So, no, I don't think the trial signals anything except accountability, rare accountability for excessive force and unjustified lethal force, a murder of an unarmed, unresisting African American man. And he was training three other officers, Chauvin was. So you've got to remember, there would never have been an invest because of that entry. Man died in medical incident. You'd have never known what happened in that video if the young woman Daniela had not gotten her whipped out her phone and videotaped that 9.5 excruciating minutes of his execution. We would never have had an investigation. We would never had the attorney general come in and take the prosecution away from the friends of the Minneapolis Police Department, who are the local prosecutors. We'd have never had an indictment. We'd have never had a trial. We'd have never had a conviction. So I think people should not feel, they should feel good that justice was done, a modicum of justice was done or modicum of accountability was done in that case. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have implications for systemic change. No.
How has the conversation around public safety changed in the era of the Me Too movement?
Well, I don't think the Me Too movement has had a huge impact on policing. I think it's had a bigger impact on the 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 other arenas where injustice plays out, the employment arena. The different industries have different kinds of misogyny and different ways of suppressing women's participation, women's legitimacy, our freedom to actually act in these different arenas in the way that men do. In the military, I think that's probably been the biggest area that I can see where Me Too added jet fuel to the battle against rape culture inside of the military. I mean, the Air Force Academy has a rape room, and the chain of command seems to be incapable of doing criminal trials of officers and other military men who rape, and they rape women and they rape men. And it's a culture that suppresses that, tries the victims, punishes the victims for even raising it. So Congress just recently voted to take all rape prosecutions and put them in a parallel system that is independent of the chain of command. Now, in military culture, that's radical, okay? It's like what we did in LAPD by creating a community safety partnership bureau. It's a separated lane, a separated column, so that you can do a different kind of policing with the community. Because the old shock and awe, search and destroy, enforcement policing is incompatible with it. Well, the rank and file, the chain of command culture is incompatible with fighting rape culture, misogyny, and the Me Too movement really made a lot of change there. I don't think that the bills would have gone through, and you would have gotten bipartisan support for that without what Me Too lifted the curtain on the misogyny, the systemic misogyny and the oppression of patriarchy. So I think it has had an impact, but not as direct in terms of everyday policing. But I think it has had an impact on the legal framework for prosecuting harassment and the rape culture in the military.
Um, do you feel with Bill Cosby being released on a technicality that this will prevent women from coming forward? Like they may feel, why? Why do I want to put myself out there and go through this? You know, when we see that this has now happened?
I think it is going to have a dampening. It's like a wet blanket on. Uh, it's devastating for his victims, who I think there's scores of them at this point.
Yeah.
Is a sexual predator, and when you see a sexual predator get off, it was very hard to prosecute in the first place. It's very hard for women to participate in that. When you have a celebrity, that means disproportionate male power in an all and in a patriarchal system already. So it's like power squared. That's why you see such timid prosecutors being timid when they have to go after powerful men, powerful sexual predators. Um, but I think it will be dispiriting, but I hope it doesn't stop women from coming forward. There's power in numbers. I could have argued both sides of the grounds for releasing him. They needed to structure his immunity deal in a different way. I could have made the argument that because it wasn't formalized, it wasn't approved by a court, and it wasn't in writing, that it shouldn't have been the basis for overturning his convictions. I would have made that argument. I don't know why it wasn't made, but I don't think we. I think we have to look at the Cosby early release as a bump in the road and a dispiriting bump in the road, but just roll over it like a bump in the road and keep going on. Women need to come forward. You cannot stop these cultures of oppression and suppression if you don't bring it out in the open. I think that gay rights took off like a rocket when when prominent people started coming out and people started realizing they had gay sons and daughters and grandchildren, and you know you know folks from those communities are in our families. And I think it made a huge difference in the vast cultural switch, because it went from, we're still fighting about gay wedding cakes and stupid stuff like that, but when you look at where we were 30 years ago, you go from Stonewall to now, and it's because the cultural tip of the spear really made the political room open. The laws followed, and we're still in a titanic struggle with for rights for all of these communities, but you can't do those battles if the communities are invisible and unseen.
You know, and I do agree with what you're saying, because I never thought in my lifetime I would see gay marriage. It was unfathomable to me. And I know with the millennial generation and now Gen Z, they look and think differently than I know my generation and generations before. Do you think this is why some of these changes have moved so quickly?
I think that played a role. I think that you started seeing movies, you started seeing prominent people coming out. There were celebrities, daytime show hosts. I mean, it was, you start seeing, wait a minute, you know, and I think that looking in our own families, there's a lot of denial. There's still rampant homophobia, transphobia. I mean, it is. Don't. I'm not painting a rosy picture here. I'm saying that we advanced much faster than I thought we would. And it doesn't mean that there aren't gigantic battles still to be won. There are, and these are battles for survival. That is clear for all of these groups. And if we don't band together to understand that critical path, the first battle is to preserve at least that promissory note for multiracial democracy and multi-community democracy, pluralistic democracy, e pluribus unum democracy. If we don't win that battle, we're not going to have any platforms on which to fight this stuff. Because if we become a white nationalist autocracy, none of us is going to survive.
And we have artists like Little Nas X, who does his thing and is very proud of who he is as a young gay man, and it reflects in his performances and his music. And he really is a master at using social media to get his message out or to be true to himself.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. We have somewhat of a lag. I apologize.
Oh, no. I don't know if there was a question, but I do think that the cultural dynamics were huge. And once that tipping point was reached, it's interesting how it builds and then it breaks, and you can never predict it. You can never predict it on it. It's just how rights go. And you take 3 steps forward, 2 back. You go 5 steps forward, and then there's another backlash, and you have to go 4 back. It's always been a jagged. Martin Luther King Jr. said it was the arc of the universe. It's more like a jagged lightning bolt. It may bend toward justice, but it takes a lot of us bending it. It's not going to be natural. So I think that all of these battles, the only reason that we're here today, and the only reason that slavery ended and we've won the rights that we had, is that the perfectibility of our framework. We started out as an aristocracy, a landed aristocracy with freedom for white men who owned slaves and had property. And we're now at a point where we're trying to expand the umbrella to fit more folks underneath that umbrella. But it's taken struggle. People have died. People have to continue to die to vindicate the realities of the Constitution for everybody. Freedom isn't free. And you've got the people who died before us so that all of us could live freer lives and have a shot at being included in the promise of the Constitution's protections and freedoms. We've got a lot of debt to pay forward. People died so we could be where we are today. And I think that we've got to make people understand the Civil War can still be lost. We won the military battle, but we lost the cultural battle. That's why you have monuments to traitors erected around the country. You have monuments to people who try to destroy the democracy. Well, they're at it again. They're at it again. Last time in the Civil War, they never stormed the Capitol. This time they made it into the Capitol. So we're going to have to get very strategic about how to unwind this, because you can't go for the Civil War again. We won't survive it. They have all the guns. But I think we have to understand how you unwind a cult, and how you unwind a cult that has been activated with a lie that they're in an epistemic battle for their very survival. We got to figure out how to unwind that in a way that doesn't require bullets.
Connie Rice, thank you for being our guest this evening.
Thank you.
It has been truly a pleasure. Don't forget, her book is Power Concedes Nothing. For our viewers, our regularly scheduled public safety meeting will begin shortly. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks so much. Take care.